So we are here to hop on and talk about tow vehicles. And we are by no means experts, but we have had quite the year with figuring out tow vehicles and going through a lot of changes and having to upgrade our tow vehicle quite a few times. We hope that we can either help someone maybe looking at tow vehicles, or if someone needs to upgrade, maybe help explain what we've learned along the way. But we've had quite the year. We've had 4 tow vehicles this year with 3 different trailers, including 1 fifth wheel. And so we've gone through a lot of learning experiences with all of that. So we're hoping to share some of that information and that knowledge. So there's kind of 2 things that we're going to go over. So we're going to go over towing and tow vehicle for trailering, as well as fifth wheel, because we've had experience with both of those. When discussing towing, I think it's super important to first go over some terminology. So we had to learn a lot of terminology when we were getting into this, and it can be a little overwhelming. So for starters, one really important term that you'll hear throughout the video is GVWR, and that is your gross vehicle weight. And that applies to both your truck and your trailer separately. They each will have a GVWR, and both of those, what it basically means is the max amount that each vehicle can handle in weight capacity. So for your trailer, that includes, once you load everything into it, that is the absolute max that it can handle. And then for your truck, the same goes there. That is the absolute max it can handle. Then UVW, that is unloaded vehicle weight. So basically you'll see that on the trailer, listed on the trailer fifth wheel. And basically what this means is, just like it sounds, it's your dry weight of your trailer. So with nothing, basically as it comes from the factory, that doesn't include any propane or water fills, or any additions that you add to the trailer. Some towable RV brands like Brinkley might come equipped with some stickers that let you know how much your freshwater tank will equal while loaded. And it's important to keep that in mind, as well as how many pounds your propane tanks are. Another term to keep in mind is tongue weight. So tongue weight is the amount of downward force on a trailer that is being applied to the hitch ball, which impacts the truck. So how much downward force from the hitch ball connection is being put onto your truck. And when you're looking at tow vehicles, a good range to look for is calculating this is taking the GVWR of your trailer and then calculating 10 to 15%. And that is kind of what you can estimate might be put towards payload. And then as far as other things to keep in mind, though, for trailers, it is important to be aware of your axles and your weight distribution. So tongue weight can vary as well for your weight distribution and where you're putting your cargo or how full your tanks are. If it's too heavy in the back, it can actually cause your tongue weight to go down because it's putting more weight on your rear axle, which will get you in the 10% range. And you don't really want to go below 10% because that's when stability can start to waver. Kind of the safe zone for once you do have your trailer and tow truck set up is typically around 12 to 13%. So those can be numbers that you can calculate when you go to a CAT scale. And then the difference in trailer versus fifth wheel is there is pin weight for a fifth wheel. And so that is also a downward force that will be put against your payload capacity and calculated into that for the fifth wheel. And since a fifth wheel kind of hangs over a truck bed at the attachment, it's putting a lot more vertical force down. So to calculate that, you'll be doing your GVWR weight of your fifth wheel. And you'll take 20 to 25% of that, and that's how you'll calculate how much pin weight is going into that, working against your payload. And then probably the most important term that we'll go over, what we found is a super important term to understand when looking for a tow vehicle, is payload capacity. So that is the amount of weight that your truck can handle, and you don't want to be over payload capacity, and we'll get into why in this video. Another super important term is payload margin. So payload margin is super important and is basically called your safety buffer. So how that's actually calculated is your payload capacity minus how much payload you're actually using. The pin weight, the hitch weight, and any cargo or human going into the truck, all of that is going to work against your payload capacity or eat up your payload capacity, including people weight, so you as a human, how much you weigh. And you want to be below that 100% use. If you're right at 0, that's a little bit unsafe. If you're under 0, that means you're overloaded and past what the capacity of your truck can possibly carry. Now we're going to talk why you don't want to be over payload and the repercussions that can be caused by it. So when you're over payload, you're obviously overloading what the truck has for capacity, which means it's going to heavily impact your braking. It's going to work harder to brake, and you could eat away at your brakes. It also is going to make your emergency brakes need to work harder to stop. It also causes some rear end loading, so some shift in your axle weight. So it'll actually offload weight from your front axle and put it towards the rear, which actually impacts your steering. So that is also a huge safety precaution or safety risk that you have when you are over payload. It also causes that instability with that steering and can actually cause more swaying and loss of control. You'll also feel more crosswinds when trailering next to large trucks on the highway. So all in all, it just causes a lot of safety concerns. Along with kind of putting more weight on your rear axles, you're also causing those rear wheels to take a lot more stress and excessive driving and heat. So it's more likely to cause a tire blowout with putting more weight on those tires and more stress on them. You're also impacting your suspension of your vehicle, and you're also putting more wear and tear on a lot of things. So your weight, your frame, your tires, your braking. So all in all, you're just putting a lot more wear and tear on your tow vehicle, causing for the likelihood of unsafe events to happen. There's also a bit of legal risk that comes with being over payload. So should you get into an accident, there could be some legal repercussions for being over your payload capacity. There's also a chance that insurance will minimize or limit your claim if you're in an accident if they find out that you're over payload capacity while trailering. And then there's just a great deal amount of safety and liability. You could be held liable for accidents if it's found that you are over payload for negligence. And you're also going to have some more financial impact as well. So you're causing more wear and tear to your tow vehicle, and therefore that can probably lead to more issues and needing to replace things quicker, more wear and tear costs. So it's better to kind of be upfront and get ahead of not being above your payload capacity when picking out your tow vehicle, so that you don't fall behind on get into financial situations with more wear and tear on your vehicle in the future. Another term is tow rating or towing capacity. You'll hear this term as well, and basically that is the horizontal amount of rating and weight that a trailer can be towed. So for a tow rating, that will be in the truck, that each truck has a different tow rating, and that is the amount of horizontal weight, basically a pulling action, that the truck can handle. You're most likely going to run out of payload capacity before you even get near reaching a towing capacity or a tow rating max, so just something to keep in mind. When we're talking about your tow vehicle, there's also your curb weight of the truck. And basically what that means is what your truck weighs empty. And so that's without anything added into it. So you'll take your GVWR and then you'll subtract your payload capacity to get your curb weight of your empty truck. Third term that you'll hear us talk about is GAWR, and that's gross axle weight rating. Basically, that's how much each axle can handle on weight. And so that will come into play once we talk into our breakdown of our CAT scale numbers. But just to know, each axle can basically only support so much weight. So your yellow sticker is going to be found in your doorway. And it's very important that you look at these. If you're shopping for a tow vehicle, you're going to go to each door and you're going to look at the payload sticker. And you're going to calculate some math. So you can either simply find it here. So it'll say combined weight of occupants and cargo should never exceed, for ours, 3,569 pounds, 3,569 pounds. And that is our payload capacity. There's also separate weight capacities per axle. So you have your front axle and your back axle. That can be important when you're going to a CAT scale and calculating things out. So you can find that on the gray sticker in the door. So for example, our total GVWR for this model is 11,800. And you can see that the GAWR front means that our front capacity is 6,000 pounds. And then we have a GAWR rear capacity, and that's 7,000 pounds. So let's head to the math, and I'll show you what I mean.
We're going to show you what we would calculate if we were to start over today looking for a tow vehicle, and what we would calculate to figure out if we're able to tow safely. First thing we would decide is if we're thinking about a travel trailer or a fifth wheel. We would go for the biggest option we think possible, and then we would calculate out either the tongue weight or the pin weight. To get an estimated tongue weight, we would take the largest trailer we're thinking of and do the GVWR times 0.15. If we're thinking of a fifth wheel, we would take the largest possible fifth wheel GVWR and multiply that by 0.25 to get the pin weight estimate. Next, we would calculate out an estimated payload that might be used. We would take the tongue weight or the pin weight that we calculated just before, and we'd add that to potential cargo and then the weight of ourselves and our dogs, as well as any vehicle add-ons or upgrades. So that also includes fuel, a tonneau cover, or any tire upgrades that might happen, and that will equal your estimated payload that might be used. After calculating the estimated payload that we think we might use, we would then be able to do a payload capacity check. We would understand the potential range of payload capacity that we're looking to stay below, and we'd look at makes and models of different trucks or tow vehicles that could potentially have the payload capacity we're looking for. we would make sure that any potential tow vehicle payload capacity would be greater than the estimated payload that we think we might use. With potential tow vehicles in mind that would be within the payload capacity range we're looking for, we would then go and look specifically at those tow vehicles and look at their payload capacity stickers. We would then calculate out the percent payload capacity used. We would do so by using our calculated payload that will be used divided by our potential tow vehicle payload capacity and multiply that by 100. That will give us a percentage of payload capacity that will be used, and we would aim for around 70 to 75% to stay in a safe payload margin. Once we identified a potential tow vehicle that has enough payload capacity to safely tow the trailers we are thinking of getting, we would then do a tow rating check. We would do this by taking the potential tow rating of the truck that we have in mind, and then we would make sure that it was greater than the potential towable RV GVWR. The last calculation we would do would be calculating the rear axle load. We would do this by taking the empty weight of the rear axle of the potential tow truck we're looking at, and then we'd add that to the estimated rear payload that will be used. This would just include the cargo that we have, the add-ons, the gas, as well as the hitch, and then again that pin weight. This is super important for fifth wheels. We would then just check that the rear axle load is less than the GAWR rear axle rating. So those are the top 6 calculations we would do if we were to start over looking for a new tow vehicle. Here is a little consolidated summary. Feel free to take a screenshot for future reference. Once you get your setup dialed in and you get your truck and your trailer fully hitched up and loaded, don't guess your weights, confirm them. Head to a CAT scale. This really will give you your loaded numbers, your actual axle weights, your real payload used, and their true tongue and pin weights, not just the estimates you calculated. That matters because the weight can add up over time, and it's easy to creep closer to your limits than you might realize. We check ours periodically, and since we're running high on our payload, it's quick, inexpensive, and one of the smartest things you can do to stay safe with your setup. So let's dive into our numbers and a real-world example. We visited a CAT scale in November, so we're going to walk you through the numbers that we got from that visit. So here from our sheet, we were able to pull our steer axle numbers, our drive axle numbers, and our trailer axle numbers, as well as the overall gross weight of all 3 axles. We then took these numbers and were able to split them up. So we split them up by fifth wheel, so that was our trailer axle, and our truck by drive axle and steer axle. We then were taking both the drive axle weights and the steer axle weights and adding them together to get the total scaled weight of the truck. So that will be the overall weight of the truck and then all of the payload that has been put on the truck. With that calculated, we are able to compare it to our GVWR numbers as well as our GAWR for each axle. You'll then want to do a check to compare your scaled axle numbers and your scaled truck weight to the weight ratings that were provided for the truck. You'll want to make sure that you're below those ratings. You'll then be able to check how much payload capacity you have remaining by taking the GVWR and subtracting your scaled truck weight. That will give you an idea of how much payload you have left before you reach your payload capacity for your truck. I then highly recommend that you calculate the percent payload capacity used. You would take that scaled truck weight and then divide it by your GVWR of the truck and then multiply that by 100, and that will give you the percent payload capacity used. Ours is getting close to 100%, which isn't necessarily ideal, but we make sure that we go to the CAT scale pretty frequently to make sure that we remain under our payload capacity. You'll also be able to calculate your truck's curb weight, so you'll take your GVWR minus your payload capacity, and that should give you what your truck would weigh empty. With your curb weight calculated, you can calculate your weight added to the truck. You take your scaled truck weight minus your curb weight, and that would give you what weight you added. You could then calculate the estimated pin weight that might be more exact than your estimate before. You can take the weight added to your truck and subtract the estimated non-pin weight, and that would give you an idea of how much pin weight might be applied to your truck. So that is our overview of some real-world CAT scale numbers and calculations. We hope you found this helpful, and if you liked this video and this information, please hit that like button below. And if you want to follow along for more of the adventure, please hit subscribe to our channel.
And if you want to watch our exact story on why we made the switch in tow vehicles with more information on the tow vehicles that we chose for each of our RVs, you can watch that. I'll link that in the description and pin it in a comment. Thank you.